Every relationship begins with a mirror. The way you allow someone to treat you reflects how deeply you believe in your own worth. When a woman forgets her value, she starts accepting crumbs and calling it love. She starts explaining, justifying, and bending herself into shapes to be understood by someone who has already decided not to see her. The power of self-respect is not arrogance. It is the quiet knowing that you are enough. It's the unshakable belief that you deserve reciprocity, not resistance. When you honor yourself, you draw a line that says this is how far anyone can come, and beyond this point, I protect my peace. Self-respect is magnetic energy. It changes how you speak, how you walk, how you respond when someone crosses a line. It's the voice that whispers, I don't need to prove my worth by staying where I am not valued. When you lack it, you tolerate confusion. You interpret mixed signals as potential. You make excuses for behavior that diminishes you. You mistake persistence for love and chaos for passion. But when you reclaim your respect, you begin to see clearly. You stop chasing validation and start embodying value. You realize that love cannot be begged for. It must be mirrored back. In relationships, people will test your boundaries, sometimes unknowingly, sometimes deliberately. The man who truly respects you will pause when you say no. He will listen when you express discomfort. But the one who disregards your voice, who manipulates your empathy or guilt, trips you into compliance, is teaching you the lesson of self-respect through pain. Every time you allow it, you chip away a small piece of your self-worth until you no longer recognize yourself in the mirror. And that's the danger, losing the connection with your own value, just to keep someone who cannot even see it. You must remember that the energy you carry determines the energy you attract. When you move from a place of self-respect, you no longer vibrate on the frequency of desperation. You don't fear losing someone who doesn't value you. You fear losing yourself by staying. You stop trying to be chosen and start choosing yourself. You start saying, if loving you means betraying my peace, then I choose me. That is where transformation begins. Not when you change him, but when you change what you tolerate. Respecting yourself is not about creating walls, it's about creating clarity. It's the internal knowing that not everyone deserves access to your heart, your time, your energy. The moment you prioritize self-respect, you become more intentional about the kind of love you allow in. You stop seeking intensity and start seeking consistency. You stop accepting apologies without changed behavior. You stop staying in places where you have to shrink to fit. Because when you have self-respect, you no longer wait for someone else to see your light. You stand tall and let it shine, even if it blinds those who were comfortable keeping you in the dark. Emotional manipulation is one of the most deceptive forms of control because it doesn't come wrapped in obvious aggression. It comes disguised as care, concern, or even love. It starts small, a guilt trip when you want to spend time alone, a sarcastic comment when you express a boundary, a look of disappointment when you prioritize yourself. You tell yourself it's nothing, that he's just sensitive, that maybe you're overreacting. But over time, those subtle moments start weaving a web that slowly tightens around your sense of self. You start questioning your instincts, doubting your emotions, and believing that maybe you are too much, too emotional, too needy. That's how emotional manipulation works. It dismantles your confidence one doubt at a time. It's not the yelling or the fighting that hurts the most, it's the slow erosion of your clarity. When a man constantly twists your words, turns every conversation into blame, or plays the victim whenever you try to communicate, he's not engaging, he's controlling. He's shaping the narrative so you become the one who always apologizes, always fixes, always smooths things over. You begin to feel like you're walking on eggshells, measuring every word, afraid of triggering another emotional storm. And slowly, your peace becomes dependent on his moods. That's the moment your freedom begins to shrink. Manipulation thrives where empathy lives. It targets the part of you that wants to understand, to nurture, to make things better. He knows that your compassion is your soft spot, so he uses it to keep you entangled. He says, "You're the only one who understands me," and suddenly you feel responsible for his happiness. He withholds affection until you give in, and when you do, he rewards you with love again. Just enough to keep you hoping. It's a cycle of control disguised as connection. You start living in emotional extremes, highs when things are good, lows when they aren't, mistaking that turbulence for passion, when in truth, it's manipulation keeping you hooked. Over time, you lose sight of what's normal. You begin justifying behaviors that once would have made you walk away. You convince yourself that love requires sacrifice, that relationships are supposed to be hard, that maybe it's your fault for not being more patient, more forgiving, more understanding. But manipulation is never your fault. It's a deliberate tactic used by someone who fears losing control. He makes you feel small so he can feel big, and he calls it love so you stay confused. That confusion is his greatest weapon, because as long as you doubt yourself, you'll never doubt him. True love doesn't make you question your worth, it reinforces it. It doesn't silence your voice, it encourages it. Emotional manipulation may look like care, but it feels like walking in circles, always trying to get back to a place of peace that never lasts. The moment you start explaining your feelings to someone who keeps twisting them, you're not communicating, you're being controlled. And the cost of staying in that space is the quiet erosion of your power, your intuition, and your truth. Disrespect disguised as humor is one of the most insidious ways someone can chip away at your confidence while pretending it's all just fun. It often starts with small remarks. Maybe he teases you about how you dress, how you talk, how you express yourself. You laugh it off because you don't want to seem sensitive or uptight. And maybe, at first, you even believe it's harmless. But underneath that laughter, something inside you tightens. You feel the sting, but you silence it. You tell yourself, "He didn't mean it that way," or "I'm overreacting." Yet deep down, you know the difference between playfulness and mockery. Real humor makes both people laugh. Disguised disrespect leaves one person hurting and the other pretending it's a joke. When a man repeatedly makes you the punchline, what he's really communicating is how little he values your feelings. Those subtle comments about your weight, your goals, your intelligence, your habits, they're not jokes, they're micro cuts. And just like paper cuts, one or two might seem minor, but over time, they sting deep and never fully heal. It becomes a pattern where he gets to express judgment under the safety of humor, and you're left feeling foolish if you speak up, because the moment you call it out, he says, "Relax, I was just kidding." That's the manipulative twist. The joke becomes a shield for disrespect, and your discomfort gets dismissed as overreaction. This kind of behavior slowly trains you to doubt your own emotions. You start questioning whether you're too sensitive, whether maybe this is what couples do: tease, laugh, banter. But in healthy relationships, teasing doesn't come at the cost of someone's self-esteem. It doesn't undermine your worth or make you feel small in public. Disrespect in disguise is meant to keep you in a lower position, to subtly remind you that your confidence can be toyed with. It's control masked as charm. When you're constantly made fun of, you start shrinking. You become quieter, less expressive, more careful, because you don't want to give him more material for his next joke. And then there's the public humiliation. The moments when he mocks you in front of others, making people laugh while you're forced to smile through the discomfort. That's not affection, that's domination. That's someone using humor as a weapon to elevate himself at your expense. Every time you allow it, you send the message that your dignity is negotiable, that your boundaries can be ignored if it makes others laugh. Over time, that damages not just your self-image, but your trust in intimacy. You start believing that love means tolerating ridicule. But love that hurts your spirit isn't love, it's corrosion. Disrespect disguised as jokes often hides deeper contempt. It's how someone reveals who they truly are when they think you won't confront them. The irony is that the same mouth that says, "I love you," can also be the one that slowly dismantles your confidence. You deserve a connection where your laughter comes from joy, not from pretending that pain is funny. Trust is the invisible thread that holds every relationship together, and once that thread is broken, no amount of apology can fully restore its strength. When a man violates your trust or invades your privacy, he is not just crossing a boundary, he is showing you who he truly is beneath the mask of affection. The act of checking your phone, reading your messages, questioning your every move. It may appear like concern on the surface, but underneath it lies a deep insecurity and a need to control. Love and control cannot coexist. One liberates, the other confines. When someone begins to monitor your actions, it's not love seeking reassurance, it's fear seeking ownership. And in that moment, your freedom begins to shrink while his dominance starts to grow. The tragedy of lost trust is not just in the act itself, but in the emotional aftermath it leaves behind. You start to feel constantly watched, constantly questioned, even when you have done nothing wrong. You begin to censor your words, hide your truth, or over-explain your intentions, not because you are guilty, but because you are exhausted from defending your innocence. That is not intimacy, that is surveillance. And the longer you stay in it, the more you begin to internalize the suspicion, to believe that maybe transparency means exposure. That love means having no privacy, that honesty requires constant proof. But real love never demands your evidence, it honors your trust as a sacred gift. When trust is violated, the foundation of emotional safety disappears. You can no longer relax in his presence because every conversation feels like an interrogation. You begin to anticipate his doubts before he even speaks them. You find yourself trying to reassure him constantly, giving away pieces of your freedom just to buy a temporary sense of peace. It's a silent kind of suffocation, one that doesn't come with bruises or shouting, but with a quiet erosion of your independence. That's how control works. It disguises itself as protection until you no longer remember what autonomy feels like. The man who invades your privacy will often justify it by saying he loves you too much, that he just wants to make sure nothing comes between you. But love that needs to invade to feel secure is not love, it's fear pretending to be devotion. A healthy relationship does not require you to surrender your privacy to prove your loyalty. It thrives when both people feel free, respected, and trusted. When he looks through your phone, checks your social media, or accuses you without reason, he's not protecting the relationship. He's poisoning it. Because where there is no trust, there can be no peace, no growth, no safety. And yet, many people stay hoping that the mistrust will fade with time, that if they love harder, prove more, reassure endlessly, things will change. But trust, once broken, does not heal through submission, it heals through boundaries. You cannot fix a person's insecurity by surrendering your privacy. You cannot rebuild connection by allowing constant intrusion. Trust is not restored through fear, it is restored through respect. When that respect is gone, what remains is control dressed up as care, and no love can breathe under that kind of weight. Control in a relationship doesn't always appear in obvious ways. It rarely begins with a command or an order. It starts with subtle suggestions, with phrases that sound protective but are meant to limit you. I just don't like your friends. I think they're a bad influence. I don't feel comfortable with you working so much. Or, why do you need to go out without me? At first, it can even feel flattering. You might mistake it for love, for deep interest, for someone caring about your safety or wanting to be close. But slowly, that closeness becomes a cage. Every suggestion turns into an expectation, every expectation into a rule, and before you realize it, you're no longer living freely. You're living within the walls someone else built for you. A controlling man doesn't always shout or demand. Sometimes he uses silence, guilt, or emotional withdrawal to get his way. He makes you feel guilty for wanting space. He pouts when you go out with friends. He becomes cold when you talk about your ambitions. And because you love him, you start adjusting yourself to keep him calm. You stop going out as much. You avoid certain topics. You start filtering your dreams so they don't trigger his insecurity. Slowly, the vibrant, independent version of you begins to fade. The more you shrink, the more he expands his control, and you start to forget who you were before the relationship began. This is not protection, it's possession. He may say he loves you too much, that he just wants what's best for you, that he's the only one who truly understands you. But love does not isolate you from the people who care about you. It doesn't make you choose between your partner and your freedom. It doesn't require you to abandon friendships or silence your individuality. Control always comes wrapped in the language of love, but its purpose is to make you dependent, to make you easier to manage. He wants you to revolve around him because he fears what might happen if you remember how powerful you truly are on your own. When someone tries to control who you see, where you go, or how you dream, they're not protecting you from the world. They're protecting their hold over you. They know that a woman who is connected, fulfilled, and confident is hard to manipulate. So they chip away at your connections, one by one. They convince you that no one else understands you, that your friends are jealous, that your family doesn't get it, that your world should revolve around them because that's what true love looks like. It's a slow, invisible kind of isolation that traps you in dependency, emotional, financial, and psychological. Control is the opposite of love. Love celebrates your individuality, your voice, your growth. Control suppresses it, silences it, and calls it loyalty. When someone limits your freedom to keep you close, it's not affection, it's fear. And fear never builds a partnership, it builds a prison. The walls of that prison are made of your compromises, your excuses, your silence, and every small moment you decided to stay quiet just to keep the peace. When a man raises his hand, his voice, or his words to dominate you, something sacred is broken, not just between the two of you, but within you. The moment fear enters a relationship, love leaves. Physical or verbal abuse doesn't always begin with a slap or a shout. It often starts with impatience, with sharp tones, with words that cut deeper than any bruise could show. The first time it happens, you are shocked. You tell yourself it was a moment of anger, that he didn't mean it, that it won't happen again. But the truth is, it almost always does. Abuse is not a mistake, it's a choice. It's an assertion of control, a way of saying, I own you. And the longer you stay, the more that belief begins to erode your sense of self until you start to believe that maybe you deserve it. That maybe this is what love looks like when it's tested. Verbal abuse is often the prelude to physical abuse. It starts with yelling, name-calling, belittling your dreams, mocking your emotions, criticizing everything you do until your confidence is so fragile that you no longer fight back. You stop expressing your feelings because every time you do, it turns into a battle. You start apologizing for things you didn't do, for things you didn't say, for simply existing in a way that doesn't please him. The manipulation becomes so subtle that you begin to think his anger is your fault. You believe that if you could just be calmer, more patient, more understanding, things would change. But they don't, because abuse doesn't stem from your actions. It stems from his need for control. And when it turns physical, the silence becomes even heavier. You hide the marks, both visible and invisible. You make excuses to your friends. You cancel plans. You isolate yourself because the shame becomes unbearable. You begin to live in survival mode, calculating every word, every movement, every breath, trying to avoid the next explosion. It's a life lived in fear, not in love. And fear has a way of shrinking your world until all that exists is him, his moods, his anger, his rules. He apologizes afterward, tells you he didn't mean it, buys you flowers, swears it'll never happen again. And for a moment you believe him. You want to believe him because the hope of love is powerful. But those moments of sweetness are just part of the cycle. the calm before the next storm. Abuse is not about anger, it's about control. It's about dominance, about power, about silencing another person to feel superior. And no amount of love, patience, or forgiveness can transform an abuser into a partner. The more you endure it, the more it becomes normalized in your mind. You lose your laughter, your light, your freedom, until one day you look in the mirror and barely recognize the person staring back. That's what abuse does. It steals your reflection, your sense of worth, your voice. You were not born to be broken, to flinch at love, to live in fear of someone who claims to care for you. You were born to be safe in your own skin, to feel peace in your home, and to never confuse pain with passion